All right, welcome everybody. My name is David. Welcome to the stream. I do these like Rust programming streams every couple of weeks. My schedule has been a bit sort of irregular for the last couple of weeks. I've been vacation. There's been work, other things going on. Yeah. So before we begin, if you are interested in like knowing when I stream, you're very welcome to follow me on Twitter. I always announce future streams ahead of time over here. The project that we're going to be working on for this stream is basically a Twitter clone in Rust. That's the idea. Currently, this is what it looks like. We haven't really done much work on the actual front end. We've been spending the last couple of streams sort of building out the backend, so there actually is something to code the front end against. We've reached a level where the backend is basically done. It can do sort of the functionality that we need to, at least to get a basic Twitter app going. So the idea is that with this stream, we're actually going to start tackling the front end, which is going to be very exciting because we're going to get to do a lot of WebAssembly. So the whole idea with this project is to build a website where both the backend and the front end is in Rust. So the backend is obviously in Rust, and as well as the front end. We're using a front end framework called Seed, which was at the time, like a couple of months ago when I started this project, I looked into the different kinds of projects or different kinds of like front end frameworks that there were. And Seed seemed to be the one that had the best documentation at the time, so that's why I went with that. There's another one that was also mentioned in chat called U, which we also did look into. Just decided that we were going to go with Seed because it seemed to have better docs. I'm not sure if that's still the case. I've never really done WebAssembly before. I have worked as a front-end developer years ago, so I'm sort of familiar with the front-end concept. I've never done like React or any sort of the more modern front-end stuff, so there's probably going to be some struggling along the way, but hopefully there's also a lot to learn. And if you have any questions or tips or whatever, just put them in the chat, and we'll have a friendly conversation about that. So let me see. I don't think there's anything else that I had to mention up front. Yeah. So the project is on GitHub. It's just on my personal GitHub. Actually, I'll just put a link to that in the chat if you want to keep up. There's also like issues and stuff like that we have to deal with there. You're very welcome to look at the code yourself, play around with it, and if you want to, you can maybe fix some of these issues. Yeah, I think we should basically just get started and let's dive in. So there's one thing left on the backend that we need to get done before I want to dive into the front end, and that's an endpoint where you can just get like who is the current user, like sort of a get me sort of endpoint or get current user. Should be fairly straightforward. Let's just make sure that we can actually run the tests. I have one issue that I really want to get fixed at some point. We have some issues with running the tests where sometimes they'll just hang randomly. I'm not quite sure why. We are doing some sort of funky business where we create like one database per test and automatically drop it at the end of the test. So I think that is causing it, but I'm not sure. It seems that running it with only one test at a time, so not running the test in parallel, helps a bit, but they still do freeze from time to time. There's a question in chat. Does your MacBook Pro slow down when streaming? I actually have a setup where I have a dedicated gaming PC that I use for all the streaming stuff. So I have some Elgato like capture card in there, and I route it through with a whole bunch of cables. So it doesn't. I have played around with streaming directly from the MacBook during Corona when my office setup was quite a bit different, and that did have a small impact on the stream. Not a whole lot though. So the tests do pass, which is a good start. All right, so I figure that we should be able to call something like we have a me already. To get profile of other, right, other users. We have a thing that lets you get a specific, like the currently logged in user. We don't have one that lets you get the profile of just any user. So that's what we have to add. I think we should probably start with a test. Tests. Don't seem to have one. User creation. Let's just make one called users. Users rs. Of the user. And it's been a while since I worked on this code base, so I don't even remember how to actually do stuff. Server. This creates a user. I believe the second argument, I believe that's the username. Yep. Actually, let's go ahead and make no, I think this is fine. I was thinking if like we had to have two users and then be like logged in or stuff like that, but I don't actually think that's gonna matter for this particular test. And then this seems to be how you call endpoints. Get users. Like that, I assume. No payload. Yeah, the get function just takes the URL. And this is like a test helper function kind of thing that we set up. The web framework that we're using is called Tide. They have stuff for writing tests for your application. We've just sort of wrapped it to make it a bit easier to work with. You don't need a header. Send it, and the status should be 200. We don't actually care about the token. We just care that the user is created. This is sort of weird. My Vim does this sometimes, where you see how it's like the layout or rendering is fucked up somehow. I'm not quite sure why that is. The only solution that I found, unfortunately, is to just quit and start over. That's very annoying. I think it started after I added the COC plugin for LSP completion. Not quite sure if there's anyone out there who's using the same setup who has the same kind of problem. I really should look into it. What I usually just do is quit Vim and start over. This works. So we get this JSON back, and we need to actually make some assertions that it looks correct. This is usually how we do that. I do believe we have a me endpoint somewhere that should probably work similarly. Calls authenticate, returns a user response. Yeah. We have this library of so we have three crates really in this project. We have the front end and the back end, and then we have a shared library that they both use. So they both use so this shared library contains all the different types that the API can return. So this is basically a way that we're sort of sure that the responses that the backend returns are actually the responses that the backend, though rather that the front end is able to deserialize. It would be kind of cool to build some tooling around making sure that the front end can only actually call endpoints that we know exist in the backend, and calling that endpoint, it's also part of the type that you know what data you're going to get back. This is something that I would like to play around with. I think we should sort of get things a bit more set up on the front end before we play around with that. But these are the kinds of things that you can only really do when you use the same language on both on the front end and the back end, which is sort of the whole point of doing this project, right? So I actually think our test is good. Let's try to run it and just see what happens. It should fail with like some 404 thing. Yeah. So it fails on line 11. It expected status 200, but it got not found. That makes sense. So over here, we need to add the endpoint. Add user's username, users get whatever, endpoints, users, something like this, I assume. So now we should fail on this to-do comment. I like to sort of try and use almost like a TDD approach where we let the test guide us into actually what to add next. So we don't add a whole bunch of tests, add a whole bunch of code, only to realize that we actually added it in the wrong place. So it fails on 269. That does seem to be over here, so that's great. I think the actual implementation is going to be fairly similar to, we had someone somewhere called like authenticate. We need to get, first we need to get the query param from the username, and then we actually need to run a query. So let's just get the database connection pool. The database library that we're using is called SQLX, which is really nice. It's fully async await. That's why we're using it. Do we have somewhere where we get a query parameter? I think from here. Yeah, like this. And then we can run a query like so. I think we do it like that. That does compile, great. And this query macro is really cool. It will, at compile time, send the query to the database and verify that the query is actually sort of semantically valid, that the columns and tables all do exist. And then this row type that it returns is like some type that only exists for this particular query, but it actually has ID and username fields, which is really great. So we should be able to say like row.id, and also row.username, I think. Oh yeah, it's an option. Unwrap. But like if we don't select username, then it doesn't compile because that field is not there. But notice that ID does compile. So this is really nice. All right. So this is the case where the user doesn't exist. For now, let's ignore that and let's just add a test for that later. So let's say that user is user unwrap. And then we basically want to return the user as a response. Can we do that? Right. I believe what we have to do is use query as. Yeah, so SQLX has like two ways of doing these compile time check queries. It has the macro that we used before, just called query, the one over here. And then it has one called query as. So query will, as we talked about before, basically create an anonymous struct with fields for each column that you select. There's query as, which is similar, but you're able to tell it what struct to actually use. And then it'll sort of assign the column names by names of the fields in the struct. So in this case, you can see we're making a query and we're turning it into a tweet response type, and it has an ID and a text. And if we look at the hold on, if we look at the shared library responses, there is the tweet response that has an ID and a text. So I think this is what we have to do, because we're not actually able to. The way that we turn like a struct into a response is by calling .toResponse, which is a thing that we made ourselves. It's just a way to wrap the JSON response in a. You can see we expect everything to be wrapped inside of a data key. So that's just what this toResponse method does. And that's implemented for anything that implements serialize, which this anonymous struct created by the query method obviously does not. So therefore we have to use query as. And I believe we have a user response type like that. And that compiles, and I believe it should make the test pass as well. All right, so most of this stuff was stuff that we spent the past couple of streams getting set up. So if you're not quite familiar with it, I upload all past streams to YouTube, so you're very welcome to check those out. Otherwise, it is very sort of close to tied. There's just small wrappers around things that we'd be doing very commonly in our API. So the test does pass. Let's make one for where the user doesn't exist. Get profile of non-existent of unknown user. So we don't create a user. And then we call, let's see. That should give a 4.4. Like that. And it panics on 238 or 283 right here where we unwrap the user. I don't quite remember how we did error responses. We have a to do here. That's funny. Let's just add an issue for that. Follow. Whoops. Where do we have error handling? believe we do here. So if you try to post a tweet that's too long, you get an error. Let's say if let some user user not found. Status code not found. That works. We should probably have a test that the error JSON is correct. Just to be sure. User not found. Status. I don't remember if that's a string or not. Let's see. Status code. And that was 404, I noticed. All right. I think that is actually all that I wanted to do. So that fixes this one. Yep. Let's close that one. I do believe I have the backend server running. Let's just go ahead and restart it. All right. I think we should actually be good to sort of get started on the front end. So if you've done like Elm or basically any other front end framework in Rust, Seed is going to look very familiar. So at the sort of core of your application is the model. That is basically a struct that represents the entire state of your application. So like what page are they on, who are they logged in as, what's their authentication token, stuff like that. Then you have messages, which are basically how you make things happen in your application. You have a, over here you have a view function that takes an instance of your model and returns HTML. Basically, so this is how you render the model, and I believe Seed will do like virtual DOM diffing stuff, so it'll only actually update the views that do change. But this is just sort of a really nice way that you don't have to manually manage all the view state all the time. You just return the whole view, and then the framework figures out exactly what updates to perform. And so to actually change stuff and to update things, we have this update function that takes a message, which is this enum up here, takes a mutable reference to the model, and this orders thing, I don't quite remember what that is for. It seems to be for like making requests and stuff like that. We'll probably get back to that. So then you can basically pattern match on the kind of message and do whatever you want. In case it's a no-op, we don't do anything. I don't quite remember what this authenticated thing is. I think that happens when you submit the form, maybe? No, so when we receive a message, create user form submitted, we get the username and the password, and then we make a request to the backend. The URL is currently hard-coded. We probably shouldn't do that. At least pull it out into a constant. deserialize the response, and then we send. Oh yeah, right. So this orders thing is a way for you. So when you make HTTP requests, those are async, and you can't, which means you can't handle them immediately inside this pattern match for the message. You have to basically execute a command, and when that command then runs asynchronously on the event loop at some point, and when that's finished, it sends another message. And that message contains the result of that command, basically. So in this case, when the form is submitted, we asynchronously make a request to the backend, and when that's done, we send a message with the authenticated message that contains the token. Then we handle that up here, and then we update the model to actually contain that user. Well, in this case, we save the authentication token, and then we load the current user. Send another message with me loaded, and that actually updates the model and locks it, apparently. So I think that is actually good for now. We're probably going to have to figure out how to store all this stuff, so you don't have to authenticate each time. I do think we have a database set up. I have a database called Wither. I do not remember what is in there. Nothing. So we don't really have a way to create a user currently. That should probably be the first thing. All right, we're probably going to want to mess around with the view. I have no idea how to even do like routing and stuff like that if we're going to have multiple pages. Is there anything on their wiki about that? Routing. View updates. Filter. I think this is like an example of implementing a basic to-do list kind of thing, which is probably where the filter comes from. URL, is that their own thing or is that Seed's thing? There's a URL there. So much stuff. Let's open that on crates.io. Currently, I have it set up so like this includes all the documentation for all the crates that both the backend and the frontend are depending on. But that's like when you search for URL, you get a whole bunch of things, and you're not really sure which of these come from Seed. It seems there is browser URL stuff, but I'm not quite sure if we can use that on the front end. So if we just go to docs.rs/seed, search for URL, we should see stuff that's actually specific to Seed. URL for routing. Do they have some like route stuff? Builder. App data. Registers a function which maps URLs to messages. I believe there is like an app thing. That's the one that we call builder on. builder takes the update and the view function, returns an app builder, and that is the one that has after mount. I'm not sure what that is for. There's the URL there as well. It represents a native URL. Routes. Registers a function which maps URLs to messages. When you return none, Steed doesn't call your update function and also doesn't push the new route or prevent page refresh. It's useful if user clicked on a link and Steed shouldn't intercept it because it's a download link. So this is URL changed with a URL. And routes. Basically just trying to figure out what these different things actually are. So when does this actually get called? Init? Do we have an init? No, we just implement default for our model. Wonder what their setup looks like. Routing. Model B2 init. Let's write a good init. Where do you set it up though? Start. Have a start. My girlfriend is making cake in the kitchen and she's using like the hand, like one of those machine mixer things. Can you hear that? Is that coming through the audio? Is it like super loud? Let me know. Use before mount and after mount instead. In after mount. How do you like what do they do in here when you, what does their view look like? Click increment, like what do links look like? View. do links look like? Update routing. Let's implement proper filter hangs for our view functions. We could do it in the view chapter, however it's better to do it now, so refresh your memories. It'll help you understand routing integration faster. So this filter, that's their own thing. View to do. Just do values. Filter. Can I see like a complete example of the code? Struct URLs. URL to base URL. So you can use a URL directly in an href of a link. This AT, I believe that's just an attribute. The attribute enum. What is the to base URL thing? Where does that come from? To base URL. Clone the URL and strip remaining path parts. All right. Self-base URL. Let's just see what stuff it's actually just logging currently. After mount, it seems to be empty. It's basically empty all the time, right? URL in update. I'm curious why. It's logging these two as if the routes are actually changing. Curious. What does their, what's it called? Start. Start init. So after mount, yeah, after mount is parameterized with the model, and so default requires that it implements, that your model implements default, which it doesn't. After mount, new with a model. That. Order subscribe URL change. Wonder what that does. Do they have one on like subscriptions? Subscribe for messages with the handler's input type. Handler has to return. Notify. Notify all subscription handlers with messages from the message type. Seed native subscriptions messages can also be sent. Most is ignored by Seed's runtime. Passed. Sending subs to URL requested. Okay, let's just try to make a link and see what happens. So they have this URLs thing. URLs new base URL. Okay. So I suppose that this like base URL business, like this URL that we get here is some sort of base URL. So I guess that's like if we wanted to nest our application at like /frontend or whatever, we could do that. But by default, it's probably just going to be empty. So then when they pass that in, so like that becomes the base URL, and then they say .home active or completed, which probably just calls something in here to like add a new path to the URL. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure which one. I believe we saw the struct URLs thing before. These are probably the ones that they're able to call. So if we do that, can we leave that off? Yep, very nice. I wonder what this URLs, struct URLs, what that does. Especially for binding URLs in nested modules. It doesn't seem to have any magical behavior on it. It's basically just a struct with methods for each of your URLs. All right, so our view and then how do we make a link? Something like this. I don't remember what this C thing is. URLs doesn't implement display. I think this macro is a bit weird. Why don't we just copy in the code so we actually know what it's doing? Seems a bit magical to hide that behind a macro, if you ask me. Then we can move the home in. All right, I'm very curious what actually happens when we click on this guy. So it calls the routing function, and that was to figure out if the URL should actually be handled at all. So if we return none here, it shouldn't be called. Yeah, that does nothing. So here, I think the idea in the routes function, I guess you could do like matching on the URL there and then return different messages like, hey, they visited this page or they visited that page. So I guess we still need to know, does the URL change in any way? No. Because like I figure what we want is like if they're not logged in, it asks you like, do you want to log in or do you want to sign up? Probably just show a form to log in and then a button to sign up or something like that. But I wonder, how do you actually route between different pages? Are you supposed to store the Are you supposed to store the page that they're on in your model, or do they have an example of how to do that here? What does that model look like? Base URL. Nah, they only really have one page. I do believe I saw like a real world app Rust seed, which I think is a bigger app with probably with multiple pages. It's basically, if you haven't heard of this thing, it's actually pretty cool. It's this project called Real World, I think, which is basically if you want to sort of try out a front-end framework and a back-end framework just to kind of get a feel for it, you usually need a project to do that with. And to do MVC is nice for like small project, but if you actually want to try it out on a bigger project with like persistence and multiple pages and users and all this thing, Real World is a project that you can build. I believe it has a spec and all kinds of stuff. I think it's like a forum or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. And there seems to be someone who built it in seed. Just cool. So I'm hoping that they do some sort of routing. Route. What is that? We should probably take a look at. Can we see what the application looks like? Alright, so it does work. That's a good start. Sign up login. They do have different pages. Let's see if we can find their view function just to figure out how they're putting that together. Lib. I should have a start function somewhere. Routes. Sync. Curious what that is. Have a view. Home. Profile. After mount. URL handling. Curious what that is. Model redirect. Let's just see if we can find this home thing. Page home.view. They did have a page thing. Home. So each page has its own model. That's interesting. View content. View banner. Does it say sign in anywhere? Let's just see if we can find that. Login page. Sign up. Route to string. Can we clone down this repository and then actually look at it in Vim? Because then we can use like Rust Analyzer, use code definition and stuff like that. Hopefully it builds. What file was this? Where the was I? Ah, damn it, this is seed itself. I think I closed the wrong. Yeah. All right. So page, I think we'll just let Rust Analyzer do its thing. .168. What is route? Is that their own thing? Yes. They don't actually change the URL here. So this is similar to what we does, or what we do, right? What do they do in update? Route changed. Change model by route. Route go to. Seed push route. Is that the function that we need to call? So in update, seed push route URL. What does that do? Add a new route using history's push state method. That seems to be what we want, because then you can like go back and stuff. Still nothing up here. Ah, which is because, what is home? Home is just the base URL. What can we call on a URL thing? Go and push. Change the browser URL to not trigger a page load. We'll add a new entry to the history. To validate the path instead of the path displayed. Alright. How do you add a new thing? Add path part. Adds the given path part and returns updated URL. They had an example in the struct URL, right? Yeah, add path part. Now it's /home. This path is /home. If we go back, we're still on home. Can we add text directly here? seems that we can. URL. It still says /home. Ah, of course. Let's say this is model. Wait, what am I? What were you trying to do? All right, let's try to go back and let's just actually try to solve the problem that we have. So we need a login URL and we need a sign up URL. So we have a login, we have sign up. All right. How would we add space between these? Oh, it's been so long since I've done HTML. Now we're on /login. Sign up. Why is there like a %20 thing there? Ah. It's curious, it seems like sometimes it doesn't actually reload. It's really annoying that Safari doesn't show the full URL. Show full address bar. Thank you. Back totally doesn't work. I'm curious why it calls update immediately after mount. right, let's figure back handling later. Let's just kind of see, how did these guys actually figure out what page to show? What did their update look like? Route changed. There's some stuff with a session. Where does orders come from? So it seems that they I was curious why they don't always call like route go to. Send G message. What the hell is that? Because functions sync with the given global message. Session stuff. Wonder if we can try to run. If we go to their app. All right, so step one, back handling is actually possible. All right, let's try to trace it. So when you click on sign in, where was that? That was in page 168. That calls this guy. That sends a route changed message. Calls change route. That's a URL. Route change has an option route. So these are their own routes. And they implement try from. All right, so here they match the, this is how they turn a CGRL into their own custom route thing. And that can fail, makes sense. Then they call this change model by route. And route in this case is probably register. Page register init. This, I'm curious, like when does the next, this changes the model. So the model becomes the model for the register page. Does that immediately trigger another update cycle? Settings message. Like, this doesn't actually seem to be doing anything, right? Session take. Ah, wait, it probably doesn't call update again. It does call view again. So view is called afterwards. Yeah, so, right. So what I was wondering is if they were like storing the current page that the user is on in the model. And they are sort of doing that in that the model is an enum with a variant for each page. So they match in their view function, they basically match on what page you're on. Makes sense. So I think what we could do is have, like, let's have an enum called page. Let's have one called root. And let's have one called sign up. Login. Sign up. And so the model has a page. And so in view, do you need the ampersand there? I'm not sure. So this is the navigation. Let's just put that below. I don't think we're gonna need that URLs thing. Let's instead, what if we could do page login to string and page sign up. And then for page, we can implement display. I have a little macro for that. That still needs the base URL. I'm curious, how did they do that? Path. That just returns a string? Yeah, it's very foreign to me as well. we're doing a lot of struggling, just kind of figuring out the ins and outs of this, the framework that we're using. But we'll get there. We're making slow progress. So that, I have no idea what that should be. That should probably just be an empty slash. Login is login. Sign up is sign up. That's probably because you can't figure out what this one is. Right. Like that. And so when the URL changed, that's just a URL. Then we want to actually convert that into a page. How did they do that? Can you do toString on that? You can. Very nice. Because like it seems that what they do is they turn it into an iterator, and then they look at the first element because they only ever call next once. No. All right. Okay. So they do actually try to sort of parse the URL. But for our case, like for the case of the profile, I suppose they can have like the username of the user within the URL. Same for article, and maybe like the ID of the article or something like that. In this case, the slug, it seems. Same for the editor. You're on root. So that returns /signup. Store the page. Do we still need to do that? I think so. You're on sign up. That works. Let's add like a home thing. Cannot go back though. That's curious why that doesn't work. It keeps sending the page that we're already on. Add listener that handles routing for navigating, like forward and back. Do they do that in their project? Nope. What did their setup look like again? Before mount type takeover. What's the URL handling thing? So that's probably what we're seeing, where it calls routes when the application starts. Do we want that or not? What did they do? They send it themselves, but they send it through. Okay, I see why. It's probably because their URL handling message thing doesn't take a seed URL. It takes their own route type, so they need to call try into to actually do the conversion manually, and that's the reason why they don't have that here. That's probably why. Model redirect. Gmessage. I wonder what that proxy thing is. Automatically map message type. It allows you to pass orders into child module. All right. I'm curious though, how does back handling work? Builder, what is a sync? Registers a sync function. The sync function is a function which can update the model based on global messages. Considers use a sync function when a sub-module needs to trigger changes in other modules. What's a module? Like a Rust module? That seems weird. Window events. seems to just be another way of sending messages in seed. It doesn't seem to me like they do any explicit setup to make back handling work. Seed push route. That's curious. Why is the initial route there again? So their route function just always passes the route along. What does my aftermount look like? Ah, okay. Yeah, so this function is just when you do a click. Apparently a back counts as a click. Do they have any documentation on how to do that whatsoever? Nope. You know what? Let's make an issue for it, and then we can deal with it later. Because it seems like we do have a basic routing setup working, right? I don't think we need this URLs thing anymore. Nope. So, let's see. What should the front, like, what should the first page look like? Let's pull the navigation out. Actually, let's go ahead and make a module for view already, because it's probably going to be quite big. View mod.rs. Pull our view function in there. Curious why it does fail to compile, but RLS doesn't tell me. There we go. right, compiles again. Say nav. Basically just sort of pulling the different bits out. Not sure if this is the right abstractions. We're just gonna try it and sort of see what happens. That, this becomes page. Like that. These. All right, let's say that these are like. Can you do that? These are my amazing CSS skills. All right, so if there is a user, how do we handle this? Curious, like, how do we do the login stuff? Because where do we know? Can we? Maybe that's not necessary. I was like, what if we're on a page that requires you to be logged in, but we're not? So like, what if there's an inconsistency between the page and the model and whether or not there is a current user? Is that a thing that can happen? I suppose that's why it's neat for the real world project thing that we've been looking at, how they have. No, they still had a separate like route abstraction. And I don't think you can unify those two things because you still, like, we still need the pages here. You couldn't make this like a route, and then that doesn't have anything inside it. That's just empty. Whereas if you have like a profile that has a user like that, because you wouldn't be able to construct a route here. Basically showing the me page or whatever will require both the page and the current user. I don't know. Let's cross the bridge when we get there. So if you're on sign up, let's just do that. So sign up I believe is very similar to these. And login, if I could type it, login. Is similar again. Curious, do they need to be separate element references? Login, sign up. So the way that you can imagine that when you like submit the login form, we get back a message. In this case, it's this one for now. Create user form submitted. That says, and that then we need to basically get the data out of that form, which means we need to have references to the input fields in that form. And so the way that you do that in C, at least the way I was able to figure it out, is that you can make on a view, like on this input view, you can call this element ref thing and give it basically a reference to some el ref thing, which in your update function you can then basically get that out, if that makes sense. So if you have an element reference, you can say .get to get the actual HTML element, and then you can call .value on that. And that's akin to like the .value in JavaScript. So I think this is how you're supposed to hook up forms to your model. What I'm not sure about though is if you can reuse them across. You probably cannot. Let's make I don't know if this is necessary, but let's make a dedicated login form. And a dedicated signup form. Can we derive default? I believe we can. And then we have a login form and sign up. Let's make that one its due. Like that. That does compile. So the messages that we need are login form submitted and sign up. Like that. And then we can hook them up to their respective forms. Oh, this should be sign up. Like that. home. It doesn't show anything for now. Login form submitted. Sign up form. Great, so that is working. Then we need to actually sign up to actually create a user. That's actually what we were doing before. Model sign up form. Let's just get a reference to it. Model sign up form. What port is the backend running on? It is on 8080. Let's just pull that out into a constant. Or do we want like a dedicated API module? I mean, I guess that'd be nice. Yeah, let's do that. API RS. It has a method for create user. And that returns a message because that's basically what this is. I'm basically thinking we're gonna have to copy the entire thing over. Takes a username, password, like that. Now we should be able to say API create user with username, password. All right. So the reason that this doesn't work is apparently perform CMD takes a future that is takes static. That basically means that it takes a future that doesn't have any reference to it, or the references that it does have live forever. And in this case, these two are not static references, they're just regular references, so that won't work. I think if we just turn them into strings, it will work. Like that. That does compile. And then it responds with authenticated. Let's try to move these a bit closer together. We're probably going to want to do some refactoring of all this update stuff. Let's call this create user endpoint responded. We get back a token. We did want to pull this guy out. API URL. When it comes back, then we load me, which we basically don't want to do for now. Let's just leave the code here. We're gonna want to use it later. All right, we should probably like show the current user or something. So how do we show who you're logged in as? Can we conditionally add stuff to a node? Probably not. Because I'm thinking like should probably do a pattern match on whether or not you're logged in. Model. Let's rename this one current user. That's usually what I call it. So if there is a current user, then we do stuff. Otherwise, show all the signup stuff. If there is a current user, then we just show home for now. That means nav takes the model as well. And how do we show current user dot username, I think. And then we want to show like a link to go to that user's page. User profile with the current user. user. Server profile. I think it's complaining that it thinks that this variable is that we're trying to call it as a function, which we obviously can't do. All right. Profile of. Can you do? How do you do like interpolation? Like that? I was wondering if you could do some like the format macro where you do something like that. Doesn't seem like it. Hopefully we haven't broken everything. We didn't actually wire up login, right? No. Sign up, Bob. We should just make the password field an actual password input. Do the same for both forms. Everything broke. All right. Option unwrap 1 and none. Front end lib 88. Front end lib 88. The sign up form is not wired up. Ah, that's because we're using, that should be username. Username, password. Network connection was lost. Did it actually? Ah, the backend crashed. All right. Middleware is 142. Ah, all right. That's the core stuff, which I thought we'd fixed. I do actually believe, so like way back, we ran into some issues with cores, cross-origin request, something, where so in Tide there is a middleware for setting up cores for requests. However, it didn't add the appropriate headers for errors, which was annoying. So we filed an issue for it, and then we made our own basically hacky fix by copying all their code, making the small modification to it, and then using that instead. But I believe our issue, or rather our issue has been fixed. What I'm not sure about is whether a new release of Tide has been made that actually contains those changes. Maybe if we just look directly at the code, we can see it, because I don't believe they have a change log. At least I'm not entirely sure. There was some like question mark thing in here that made it not work, which seems to have been at least removed. If we go to the repository, they have releases. It's a bunch of session stuff. Right. Yeah, so this is basically the fix that we're just talking about. And that came out in 0.12. What version are we using in the backend? 11. All right, we should probably update at least to 12. Just see what happens. We have had issues in the past where updating Tide would give us like tons of breaking changes. We could spend an hour fixing them. I'm hoping that is not the case today. Now, I think we're gonna not do all our middleware stuff, and then we'll basically ignore them for now, just to get that bit working. Server.at. State is not clone. All right. I did see that somewhere. State must be clone. All right. Fine, this is not a huge deal for us. The pool is basically already a wrapper around an arc, I believe. So it's a pool, which is basically an arc already. So cloning it is fairly cheap. We do want the era to JSON middleware. There's probably been some breaking changes in their middleware API. Middleware. Whoa. That's a lot of lifetimes. Log middleware. Ah, they're using async trade. All right. I don't believe we are. No. So async trait is basically a crate for allowing to use, or rather have async methods inside of traits. That's not something that's currently supported by Rust for a number of reasons. However, basically adding this annotation sort of makes it work. It's not entirely important how it makes it work. It does come at a bit of a performance cost as compared to the normal async stuff, but it's fine. State middleware. Like that. I think we can just move it over unless there were more changes. All right, so that is just straight up a response. Now we should probably read their change log for what the changes that were actually made. Changes to error handling in middleware. Before calling this patch, next await in middleware will return a result response. The idea was that error variant could be freely thrown up the middleware stack and transformed into a response at the top of the stack. However, in practice, it didn't turn out great. Middleware such as cores need to manipulate the error path to ensure the right headers were set, and we didn't provide an interface for this. Right? So instead, this patch changes the way we handle errors in middleware. We still enable question mark to be used inside a middleware, but between each middleware, we convert. All right. And if an error occurred, we populate the newly introduced error response error field. That's probably the one that we need. Response error returns an optional reference to an error if the response contains one. Set error. I'm not sure that we need to do that. Wait, no, we do. Because what this basically does is it takes any error and converts it into a response that has that body thing that we expect. So for success responses, there's a data key with whatever the response is inside it, whereas for errors we've made an error, and then that always has a status code and a message. So in this case we need to look if the what did we do here? I'm curious. It seems like we're doing something regardless if this is an okay or not. if right. So if it's a success, if there's no body, then that also counts as an error. Then we set that error. Whereas if the body is not empty, then the body that we took out, we just sort of put it back. Instead of a match response, you would want if let. I'm not sure. I think we need to check the this error field that they introduced. That seems to be exactly what we need. So if that returns an error, then we set a body that looks like this. Maybe that's what you're referring to. Yeah, it seems like it was. Sorry about that. If let some error. If there's no error, then we just return the response as is. Otherwise, we do this. Which I think is all that we need. What is that? UF while parsing. I feel like we've seen this error before. Logging in with invalid password. I believe that was if the request didn't have a body or something. Let's see where this test is. And then it's on 147. Whoa. Oh, damn it, what was the test called? And now my Vim did the weird rendering thing again. That's great. It's in test login. What? It did it again. I think it has to do with when the window changes sizes or something. It's very weird. With invalid password. It calls session post. That's the login. Logging in with invalid password. If valid is false, then return status code forbidden. Right. Yeah, so the case that we did handle before in our error response mapping middleware thing was if the body was empty, which we don't handle currently because we nuked the code. So that was this stuff. It's probably similar. It's a bit curious if that state should even be allowed. Should we be allowed to return a response which just has a status code, or should we always enforce that there is some like more specific error, because then this case would basically never happen, right? I suppose we shouldn't actually check if the body is empty, but rather what the status code was. I'm not quite sure. I think probably we should change this to invalid username or password. And we'll keep that as is. And then how did we do errors? So that should fix that test. Next one is logging with unknown user gives 404. So this one, that is the exact same thing. Up here, four. There we go. So how would we prevent, where were we? How will we prevent you from just returning a response directly there? Basically can't. And the reason that we can't do that is because our response serialization thing is implemented for anything that implements serialize. Does response implement serialize? No. What exactly did we do before? It was in endpoint users. Guess it wasn't that one. Login. Yeah, so how do we prevent it from just doing that? It's also a bit funky that this method returns a a result. Like it'll always be okay. I suppose the reason we did that is just so we have to avoid it, just so we don't have to type okay all the time. Maybe the explicitness of having to type okay is better. Not sure. The question is, should we add the handling of empty responses to the middleware? Like an empty response body is fine, right? If you call some endpoint that just has a side effect, then you don't really care about the response. You just care about the side effect, like posting a tweet or whatever. That's technically fine. We could be like, if does status code have a way of telling us if it's a success or not? Is success. I think we could try to use that one. And then, so if we change that back to what it was, like that, then this test should fail now. And it did. And so if we instead get the status, if it's a success, we just return it as is. Otherwise, we have to take the body, and then we learned that we have to put it back. Then if the body is that was the thing that returned like an option bool. How do we deal with that? All right, we just ignored it. So if the response is not a success and there was no body, then we give it one with the status and just something went wrong. Otherwise, if there is a body, then we just keep it. Does that make sense? I think it does. So if it's a success, we don't do anything. If I think actually breaking it up would be a bit clearer. Something like this. If it's a success, we clearly do nothing. Otherwise, we take the body. If it's empty, then we make one. Otherwise, if it's not empty, then we just keep it. Great. So this should be something went wrong because it hits this path. Sweet. And I believe there was one other case. These are tests. Whatever. I think we'll leave it there. I think that should work. Let's restart the server. Actually, there were some comments in our code. Let's just nuke that. We don't add the cores middle either. Wait, we also had to update to the next version yet again. 13. I wonder what changed in 13. Whoops. Releases 13. Sessions. Long-standing bug with our default middleware. Clarifies our stability guarantees. Rename the API to register middleware through. I think this became the dot middleware became dot with. Yeah, add middleware to the application. Everything seems to be compiling. All the sessions that we don't really need. That we need. Duplicate log messages. Disable the default logging middleware. And the fans on my computer are going crazy. I think that is it. Let's run the tests. Sometimes the tests hang, even if we're running it one thread. That's still something that we have to figure out. You see, this time it runs immediately. All right, everything still works. I almost don't remember what we're doing on the front end. Pre-flight response is not successful. We didn't even add the middleware. Chorus. Should that be all methods? All right, let's try again. There we go, that seems to have worked. There's now a user there. The page did not reload though. I guess that makes sense because we're never actually telling it to. Well, no. It should update the view. Is update always called after each view? Or rather, is view always called after an update? I would think so, but I'm honestly not sure. Let's wire up login just so we can see it. Login form submitted. It's going to be fairly similar to this one. Create user login. This was the that was to load me. It wasn't actually logging in. How do you log in anyway? That is to create a session. Authenticating without auth header with invalid. Logging in with invalid. Creating a user. Wait, what? Create user returns a token. That sets the token. Then we have to load me. That's what we're doing it for. So this takes an auth token. So after signing up, we reload me. No, after... Yeah, because... Wait. creating a user returns a token. It doesn't actually return the user. That's odd. Post users create a whole bunch of stuff. Hashing the password. It just returns a token. That's a bit odd. Because that means we have to, after logging in, we have to load the current user. I suppose it could return both the current user and the token. But all right. So reloading current user. Sorry about that. Calls, let's see. With the auth token. And then it sends me loaded, which sets the current user and locks it. Let's just not do that. Reload current user is never called though. Like that. Does that mean that it should actually work now? Let's go ahead and delete the user. Cascade, is that how you do it? Yep. Now we should be able to sign up again. Curious if it worked. That's probably why we locked the entire model here. It did work, and it did re-render. Curious why it didn't work before. You also have to make it work so that when you hit enter, it actually submits the form. All right, and it correctly shows there. I don't think this link is wired up at all. That's in view. That crash. Why did that crash? Lib 72. No. Right. It's a bit annoying that we have to update that every time. Yeah, now we're basically at the part where we have to actually parse the URL. I wonder if there is like an elegant way to do that. That's a URL. It did have like some iterator thing, right? Where you could iterate over the paths. Hash path next reload. How did they do it in the real world app? Dot path. Get path. Thank you. Can you say, like, can you match on arrays literally in like this? Oops. No. Although that's actually pretty cool. Then I'd imagine we'd be able to say like sign up, login, empty, I suppose would be the root, and like we actually have the wrong URL here. That would be user, users. And then we could do page, user profile takes a user response. That's unfortunate. It really should just take a string. It's a bit unfortunate that we have to convert the URL to a vector, because that allocates. Except for that, I think it's actually a pretty neat way to do it. Let's just log the path, so that in case there's any errors, we can actually see what they are. It fails to compile though. View username. User profile takes just a username. I don't actually think we need to clone it. I think a slice should work. Sign up /Bob. I don't think our routing quite works yet. Have we nuked all the users? That works, and if we click here, profile of Bob. All right. We can go home. Very nice. Now we need a logout kind of thing. And we need a way to actually store the current user, so if you reload the page, it doesn't go away. Let's see, do we have a logout? No, we don't. I don't think that is very hard to add. I think that's basically just deleting the auth token. Let's do that. Let's say login. Do we need one for logout as well? Yeah, let's just add a separate module for that. Logout rs. Logging out. Users. Don't we have like a test that calls me or something? User creation. Creating a user and logging in. That seems to be what we want. What frameworks are you using for the web server? I'm using a framework called Tide. It's just Tide on crates.io, TIDE. So calling me should work. Actually, let's say that returns 403. That's forbidden, right? Yep. So we should be able to call, let's see, delete users Bob session authenticated 200. So if we create a user, then we call me with that token, that works. If we then delete the token, we get back at 200. If we then try to use the token again, now it doesn't work. And this should fail because the endpoint to delete a token doesn't actually exist. It didn't run at all. Because we didn't add the module. Log out. And it failed with, so the endpoint does exist, but it only currently accepts a post and not a delete. That's why we get method not allowed instead of 404. Sweet. So that means we also add, how did it work when you had multiple endpoints for the same, like multiple methods for the same route? Did you do it like this? I guess so. Post. Add an endpoint for post requests. Does that mutate it or like override it? Let's find out. So it seems that it worked, that it at least crashed in the right point. None of the other tests are failing, so logging in clearly still works. So logging out is similar to logging in. We had some authenticate stuff. And then we basically have to delete the token. So authenticate finds the token, but it doesn't return it. It does parse the token from the header. So let's pull that out into a function. What should we call it? Get auth token on the request. And that fails because the header might not be there, or it might not be value UTF-8, I think. Yeah, I was wondering if I was hoping that like the lifetime on the slice here would be the lifetime of the request. It doesn't seem that it is. That returns a string, captures. Captures. I don't think this should change anything. The reason that I'm thinking this should work is because get header already borrows from the request. So it returns a slice that lives for A, and A is the lifetime of the request here. So I'm afraid this is the end of the video. For some reason, my internet connection decided to just die. I'm currently without internet. I'm not exactly sure what's going on. I'm gonna have to call my ISP tomorrow. Unfortunately, that means no more streaming for today. Sorry for the abrupt end to the video. If you want to watch the next stream, go ahead and follow me on Twitter. I always announce streams ahead of time there. You're also welcome to just subscribe here on YouTube, and I will upload a recording of the stream as always.